Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, JCPS is showing us exactly how school choice works with their own program that they're offering in order to help deal with their whole busing problem. The Kentucky Lantern runs a story on the data centers coming into Kentucky, and while they're trying to paint a rosy picture, in the story they do mention the fact that something I've brought up regularly on this show: what's the point of offering all these incentives to data centers? But, they don't want you asking too many questions because, of course, we know that Bashir claims this as a great victory. And then finally, Linda Blackford writes an op-ed about Lex City Church and its recent sexual scandal where she calls out people calling on drag shows as sexualizing children as being wrong, but it's actually the churches doing the harm. We'll see exactly what's wrong with this argument. It's not the first time we've heard it from the left. We'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Please make sure you like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to the show. Make sure you leave a review. Do the show each and every day. Would appreciate it if you left a review. Knowing that you're listening, knowing that you enjoy the content keeps us making the show every day. If you're not listening, you're not enjoying the content, well then why keep making the show, right? I know what I think, but I'm just kind of letting you know some other viewpoints that you're not getting elsewhere in the media. So please make sure you're sharing and letting others know about the show. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So JCPS, Jefferson County Public Schools, put out a press release regarding bus rider change of address deadline. July 2022 is the top of it. And then their subheading is transportation stipends for eligible family sets. And within the letter, they state that JCPS will offer stipends to some families who are transporting their children to and from school this fall. Families who have been informed that they will not have JCPS transportation to their magnet, traditional, or non-resides academic Louisville school, but are staying at their school and using alternative transportation, will be eligible to receive a stipend. This stipend will be $5 per day for most parents/guardians and $10 per day for parents and guardians whose students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Sign-up instructions will be sent to qualified parents and guardians in early August. First, let's just pause here for a second and shape in what they're talking about here. So for those of you who are unaware, JCPS had an awful busing debacle early on in the year, and they just figured out, we can't get enough bus drivers. Now, they'll have you believe this is something to do with funding or some other problem, but it's really, really not. What this has to do with is the fact that the kids are unruly and crazy on the bus, one, and then two, they adopted this new software to go ahead and make these bus routes that they didn't bother to test. They didn't bother running through the routes at all. They didn't bother practicing the routes before the school year started. And so bus drivers were getting increasingly frustrated. Several quit. They did a sick out. That's how we know that this is the problem, because during that sick out, they had released a statement saying what the actual issues they're having with JCPS is, and then therefore why they wanted to see changes. This is why bus drivers weren't riding with them. And so JCPS, trying to fix their busing problem, had announced early this year that they would be no longer busing kids to their magnet schools. So for those of you who don't know what that is, basically magnet schools are schools that are generally they're within other schools. Louisville has like a specific magnet schools too as well. That's like their own building. But like if you live in Lexington, this would be like SCAPA. If you live elsewhere, maybe this is like your technology schools, where their schools may be geared towards something very specific: music, arts, mathematics, something along those lines. And so your kid goes actually to somewhere else where they have a concentrated teaching staff that are experts on that subject to teach your kids about it. And so that's an optional thing. You don't have to go, but it's something the public school offers to kids who are gifted in certain areas. It's the closest thing you're going to get to school choice in many of these areas if you can't actually afford to pay, $10,000 to $15,000 a month for private tuition and you can't homeschool. And so JCPS came in and said, you know what, we can't afford to bus you anymore. And so this was affecting around 14 to 15,000 students or so. And they announced that it would be only eligible families. So I don't know exactly how many families it will be, but even at just $5 each, this will cost each and every day. If it's all $15,000, it would cost JCPS each and every day $75,000 a day if it's only the $5 per day amount. Now you go into the $10 per day question here. That's what's also odd about this stipend is that it's $5 a day for most parents and guardians and $10 a day for parents and guardians whose students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Why is it more money for those who don't qualify, for those who qualify for free and reduced lunch? Whether you're poor or you have money, whether you are somebody of means or not, the cost to get your kid to school is the same. The cost of what the schools are spending per student to get them to school would be the same, regardless of how much money you have. So not only is this obviously goes with the school choice arguments, because here what they're doing is they're providing a voucher for parents to then use that money to figure out a way to get their kids to school themselves using private means. Quintessentially what school choice is, the exact thing that they're fighting against so hard, the voucher, quote unquote, voucher system that they have, that they're worried that Amendment 2, if passed, the school choice amendment will become. So they're endorsing a voucher system for getting kids to school, but at the same time, they're using this as an opportunity to just give more money to families that they think it's another welfare handout. The cost to get your kids to school costs the same, regardless if you qualify for free or reduced lunch or not. Gas costs the same. So why give them more? I'd love to know the reasoning behind why it costs these kids more. It costs the school the same amount, and it's supposed to be delivering. Remember, the sell of the public schools from all the Democrats is that we treat all families equally, rich or poor. They all have the same opportunities at public school. That's why we need to support only public schools. But this literally doesn't make sense. You're doubling the payout? Odd, really odd. And then on top of that, going into this stipend side of things, of course, about qualifying for free or reduced lunch, I believe, I could be mistaken. Somebody please, if I'm wrong, email the show, info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. But I believe almost every single person going to Louisville schools technically qualifies for free and reduced lunch. Because the way the system is set up is that if a certain percentage of students going to a school or within a district qualify for free or reduced lunch, they go ahead and just give everybody free and reduced lunch. And what's funny too is if you somehow qualify for free and reduced lunch, then during the summer, they send you EBT. They send you like a food stamps card for during the summer paying for food. Even though you're already on SNAP, you're already on food stamps, you're already collecting money. It's just like more money. But anyways, so I do believe everybody qualifies if a certain percentage. Well, I know that to be a fact. I believe just about everybody in the Jefferson County School District, though, does qualify under those rules. That's how you have people driving Porsches, getting free lunches on the taxpayer dime, dropping their kids off in $100,000, $200,000 cars, getting their lunches paid for by the taxpayer because the system's broke. It's just broke. The more people you can get living off the taxpayer's dime, the better, the easier it is to control them. And so what do you mean by that? Do you mean people who actually qualify? Or do you mean everybody receiving free or reduced lunch? Because that means everybody be getting $10 a day. Everybody be getting $10 a day. And to rewind here too, $10 a day per student means that the school is spending, if the average bus, let's say, has 50 kids on it, is spending $500 a day, per school bus. That should be more than enough to be able to afford a bus driver to drive these kids. But once again, the reason why they're having problems has nothing to do with available bus drivers and everything to do with the fact that they can't kick kids off the bus. I mean, there's a story a few months ago about a JCPS driver quitting to form his own private school transportation program, driving 10 kids to and from school every day. and getting paid by the parents to specifically do it. Because he can take this $10 a day, drive 10 kids to school every day, and he makes $100 a day working like 4 hours a day and is able to kick people off. So he's looking at it that way. He's like, I make $100, $200 even. I can make more than that, possibly. Just driving kids to school, and guess what? If they act up, I don't have to deal with it, which is what they all really want to deal with. So once again, just shows giant fail by JCPS. You know, the entire policy makes no sense. It's a voucher system, the same thing you fight against. You're giving more money to certain people just based upon their economic status, even though that has no determining factor on their cost to actually transport children. Just once again, asking another way that they're asking those who aren't living off the government teat to pay even more. You know, the ways that, you know, we talked about this with John Hodgson. We've got a lot of immigrants in the area coming to the country that are already in the school systems that are costing the taxpayer more money because they have the cost of the translation services that they talked about and the extra help trying to teach them English and get them on board. So that's already costing money, but many of them do qualify for this free and reduced lunch program. They qualify for welfare programs, and just more money going into it, just more it's costing us. Absolutely ridiculous. This from the Kentucky Lantern. Something I've been talking about is this data center in Kentucky. I'm reading now from the article, Driving Surge in Demand for Power Data Centers, Kentucky. Well, I'm going to be referencing that article a bit. I'm not going to read from it because I'll give you the background here. In the revenue bill that was passed this year by the Kentucky legislature, they passed a rider that if a big data center came into a area in Louisville, specifically in Louisville, and at least invested, something like $500 million or so in building a data center, they would go ahead and get a 50-year exemption for sales tax. So that company would not have to pay Kentucky sales tax for 50 years. And so the Kentucky Lantern's writing about these data centers eyeing it up. And one thing they bring up, and this is something that I brought up too as well, quoting now from the article, in an earnings call in May, the CEO of the parent company of Louisville Gas and Electric and Kentucky Utilities said it is actively working with several large data centers in Kentucky. PPL Corp CEO Vince Sorgi said the prospective centers would each need 300 megawatts to 500 megawatts of electricity. For comparison, one prospective data center could consume the entire power generation of one LG&E and KU's coal-fired units. E.W. Brown Generating Station, the utility's coal-fired power plant in Mercer County, has the net power capacity of 457 megawatts. This has been a problem that those of you who listen to the show know I've been ringing the bell on for a while for Kentucky. We are actively going out and getting data centers, offering tax incentive programs for these data centers. We're actively going out there and offering tax incentive programs for other giant power consumption things like crypto mining forces and everything else that is putting extra pull onto our utilities. And in order to pay for that, the taxpayer, the ratepayer, is going to have to shoulder some of this cost. There is no way that data center coming in pays the full cost of rate of what you or I would. They're going to cut a deal with them in order to help fund it, but they got to build the lines, they got to build the substations, they got to build all these things in there, and we, the ratepayers, are going to have to pay for it. On top of that, you have simultaneously, as this power demand's going on, you have a struggle going on as long as the Biden administration remains in office. And that is the Biden administration is purposely trying to increase the cost of coal-fired power plants. Because here's the thing, the things like solar and wind and even natural gas costs more than coal to operate. We're not there. We can't store the power with wind and solar. It's just not there. Natural gas costs more in order to get it working. Coal is after hydro. And if you have hydro, you're golden, right? But there's only a few states that have majority hydro because they have the natural resources to make majority hydro. But after hydro, the cheapest power you have is coal. But you see, the Biden administration doesn't want you using coal. So they've been trying to raise the costs of using coal in order to force power companies to go to alternative sources because they hate coal. Well, this led to this year in the legislature, the Kentucky legislature forming an oversight committee to oversee a new oversight group to oversee the power companies' regulatory body, the public utility regulatory body, because they've been improving the shutting down of coal-fired plants, and they say, no, we don't want to see that. So simultaneously, you have Biden policies coming in on top of the Kentucky legislature and in Kentucky in general trying to fight back against this killing of coal because, of course, our economy in eastern Kentucky greatly relies on coal, and, of course, there's parts of western Kentucky relies on coal. And so they need that power to stay in place, to stay coal-fired, to keep those jobs. But because the Biden administration, it's raising the cost, now you throw in the more demand from these power centers. This is a bad idea, but that hasn't stopped the legislature from go ahead and dumping tons of economic incentives in here. And you say, well, it must generate a lot of revenues, then it must pay for itself. Now, this is buried in the article in the section that says, what are data centers and what can they bring? Josh Levy, the industry spokesperson and president of Data Center Coalition, who addressed the Louisville conference, put growing data usage in similar terms, sending emails, using search engines, streaming video, credit card transactions, sending high-definition medical records to help make diagnosis in healthcare. We're doing it in more places, our home office, the plane, the train. We're doing it all hours of the day. It seems like we're fairly ubiquitous, in our command to generate data, and our companies are very much responding to that. The payoff, at least in terms of capital investment and potential tax revenue, can be significant for communities and states that have power, internet connection, and workforce. Communities in Northern Virginia, a nucleus of data center development, could reap tens of millions of dollars from local taxes on operations. Critics, however, say that Virginia's state tax breaks for data centers generally cancel out any new revenue brought in by local governments. States outside the data center hubs of Virginia and Atlanta have already benefited from the boom. In Mississippi, Amazon is spending about $10 billion to build 2 data center campuses in southern Indiana across the Ohio River from Louisville. Facebook's parent company, Meta, is investing $800 million in a data center. Levi, in a statement to the Lantern, also asserted that data center jobs have a multiplier effect beyond their direct employment, pointing to Data Center Coalition Commission report by consulting group PricewaterhouseCoopers that found that nationally, each data center job supports 6 jobs elsewhere in the broader economy. And I think we need to pause there because there's been several things said in here that should point to the fact that offering these tax incentives to data centers absolutely makes no sense. So early on, they mentioned that these incentives end up actually costing more than they're bringing in. Like you're offering so many incentives that it really doesn't matter how much they bring in because it's all negated by what you've offered them. Which, fact check, true. I mean, a 50-year sales tax exemption, like that's a massive amount, because here's the other thing about data centers. They do not generate a lot of jobs. They want to say it's a job multiplier. Well, first off, for every data center, there's not that many on-site jobs. All you need on-site is maintenance and a few people working on the servers and things like that. But a lot of the other like customer service side of things that go data centers, they can be elsewhere. They're remote, right? I mean, data centers naturally are remote. They tailor to remote people that aren't walking in. So when he says it creates, 6 jobs elsewhere in the broader economy, he doesn't even mean in your state. It could be literally in California. It could be in, Virginia. It could be in, Texas. It doesn't matter. But locally, how many jobs does it create? Now, they try to claim that the construction jobs are great and that creates jobs. But once again, 1, construction jobs are temporary for the area. And then 2, construction jobs leave the minute the construction project's done. And there's no guarantee that the construction jobs being brought in are being given to Kentuckians because, you're talking about building, billion-dollar data centers. Meta investing $800 million, data center across the river there in Indiana. How many companies in Kentucky are there that could build, that have experience building billion-dollar buildings? There's not that many. Now, I'll tell you that there is somebody, head of transportation cabinet old ex-mayor of Lexington, Mayor Gray Construction. They could possibly benefit for these kinds of things. Makes you wonder, right, who's pushing these things. But the point is that there's no guarantee of jobs. The seeking for data center jobs is completely, I do not understand it. I do not see any benefit to us. I only see downside. Any legislator, anybody wants to try to make the pitch as to why data centers are a good idea, email me. Tell me about it. Call me up. A lot of you legislators have my phone number. Call me up and explain to me why data centers are good for our economy, how it's worth a 50-year sales tax exemption for these companies. You know, sales tax that all the small mom and pop shops have to pay. But hey, you got the money to build a $500 million data center. Guess what? You're doing so bad. Apparently, you need so much help that we're going to go ahead, and we want you so badly too for all those awesome jobs you bring. You know, those like all of 50 maybe jobs you'll bring at the most, if we're lucky that they're actually in Kentucky and not elsewhere and remote. Well, for all that, you know what? We're going to give you a sales tax exemption. You know, and you're hiring, of course, these people that already are doing pretty well, probably in the tech sector. But, you know, you hire 50 people for basic jobs as a small business owner here in Kentucky. Nah, not interested in offering you a sales tax exemption to help out your employees. Not interested at all. Not interested in helping you at all. You're too small of a fish for us to go ahead and care about. All right, finally here. Linda Blackford did an opinion piece in the Herald Leader about City Church. For those of you unaware of the history on City Church here, I'm not actually going to go through her article. We just need to really read the top headline to hear the argument. But to explain what's going on here, so Lex City Church used to be Quest Church, which is one of the bigger churches in Lexington. And it was founded by Pastor Hines. Pete Hines, I believe was his name. And Pete Hines, back in, I think it was right around about 2013 or so. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. Yeah, 2013, 2014. He stepped down as lead pastor because he was reportedly having an inappropriate relationship with the other female kind of like pastor lead. So he was the lead pastor, but then there's this like second in command pastor that was a female. He's supposedly having an inappropriate relationship with them. He said it wasn't sexual necessarily in nature, but it definitely crossed a line. And so the church asked him to step aside. So he steps aside. And then they rebrand to Lex City Church. And apparently while they were Lex City Church, a guy that was a pastor there was having essentially raping a girl under 18, having sex with a girl who's under 18 that is going to the church. She obviously couldn't consent, so she was raping, or he was raping her, clearly. A pedophile. So basically they had a pedophile within the church. And, there's bad people a part of any organization. Like, it's unfortunate, but any organization that's tens of thousands of people will have pedophiles in it. Any organization that has people having some sort of power over other people, there's something about that kind of that megalomaniac mind that attracts people to certain positions of power, because we see such a high incidence rates of pedophilia and sexual misconduct with our politicians. So it's not really necessarily, it's got to do more with the mental psyche of people. But that doesn't mean the church is the problem. It means people are the problem. And anybody who's a Christian understands that churches aren't the problem. People are the problem. It's people who have failed, who've fallen short of the glory of God, of course. But that didn't stop Linda Blackford from seizing on this opportunity about Lex City Church to write an op-ed talking about how it's not drag shows that are the problems for the kids, but it's the churches. The churches are causing the problems for children, and they're the ones causing damage, so we should come out against them. Which, first, to point out here that there's a difference between an organization who has horrible people that are a part of it, because they're big organizations that attract in all kinds of different people, but when they do find out about something like this, they condemn it, and it's not acceptable. And an organization and groups like these drag shows, that what we're talking about when we're talking about sexualizing children and sexual misconduct with children, things like kids shoving dollar bills into G-strings and so on and so forth, that community doesn't condemn it, they celebrate it. So that's part of the problem here. Now, if Lex City Church turned around and had a service where they're celebrating the fact that this piece of trash pedophile was messing around with an underage girl, well, then that would be, obviously, that would be a huge problem. That would be comparable to what we see going on at these drag shows, but that's not it. Drag shows, you have sexual misconduct, misbehavior, exposing yourself to children, kids involved in sexual acts, watching adults simulate sexual acts, sometimes nudity, and it's not condemned by the community around it. They bring their kids to it. So that's a big difference. The other difference here, and not to run away from the issue, but the drag shows do have a fair amount of sexual predators. Take, for example, the guy who Andy Bashir took a picture with in the Capitol that came down to protest the bill banning the gender transitioning of minors. He came from out of state, and according to a few local stories, he was at least a part of the same organization, if not the same guy, from up north that traveled down to Kentucky, but he was arrested for child pornography. Just so happened. And so, one, you have to look at your incidence rates. And your incidence rates of these high, loud activists involved in the transgender LGBTQ side of things, and the rate of which they get taken on pedophilia and child messing around with kids and everything else is high. It is really high. It's hard to track down the exact numbers because nobody wants to track it. Media's not going to track it. But if you sit there and write LGBTQ, trans activists, child pornography, or pedophilia, you will find tons and tons of stories of out loud activists. I'm not going to say every single LGBTQ person is necessarily has a higher incidence rate, but I'm saying of the activists who are really loud about this, really insistent upon it, it's a really high rate. But here's the other point I want to make about Linda, and that is that there is a group that has a much higher, based on several studies that have been done, 10 times higher incident rate of child sexual misconduct when compared to even that of the Catholic Church, let alone outside the Catholic Church. But the Catholic Church, who's most well known for sexual misconduct, of course, amongst the churches, this group has a 10 times higher rate, and that is our public schools. 10 times higher rate of sexual misconduct with minors by teachers and school staff at our K through 12 public schools. Yet, will Linda Blackford ever write an article saying, hey, is public schools doing more damage than good to our children? Could you imagine her ever doing that? Of course not. She doesn't actually care, and I think that's the grossest thing about all of this. This is what I find so disgusting about people like Linda Blackford. You don't need to do a whataboutism when it comes to child pedophilia, when it comes to messing around with kids, when it comes to victimizing children. We don't need to do a whataboutism. It's wrong no matter where it is. Public schools, churches, drag shows, it doesn't matter. I can be consistent in the fact that I don't need to do a whataboutism. All these people are garbage. All these people are awful. When we're calling out these drag shows as having, of being bad for children, it's not that there's people who misconduct with kids within the groups, because as I said, you have that almost anywhere where you have large amounts of people. It's that the culture celebrates it. That's the real problem. That's what we find so disgusting. Well, y'all, that's what I got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank y'all so much for joining me. We'll be back here on Monday. I hope you have a great rest of your day.